Uh, Thank you. And Seth Klein will present shortly. And I would also like to thank Tanya Jarzibiak and any other elected officials attending. Could I actually just do a poll? And if there are any elected officials, could you raise your hand? If there's anybody in here, I don't think so. Okay, so we will one of the goals tonight is to find some consensus, and I think we can all agree that we're very happy to in this time to be led by a majority NDP government under Premier Eby through this time of trade war and threats to our Canadian sovereignty. And so we're grateful that we have NDP leadership and that we won a hard fought election last November. It was very close, and we're very happy that the NDP came out ahead. Um, and so we definitely are here hoping for civil discourse and etiquette. So if we can be as professional as possible, that would be great. And yeah, the keys to SCOEE Hall working and being a venerated platform really hinges on our high regard experts. So thank you very much for being here, Seth. And also for members of elected officials and provincial office. So again, thank you so much, Tanya, for being here. And then, of course, to all our campaigners, volunteers, financial supporters, and voters in the audience at large. We need all three of those aspects together, working together to really make this thing work. So, um, Thanks for being here. And I guess we do have a little donate button on the invite. And if anybody's happy to throw $5 to $20 just to help us cover the costs of these events, we will be running this series through 2025 and into 2026. So um, the idea for the next one will actually be um, our Indigenous talk. This talk is kind of our NDP talk, so um, yeah, if you feel like sending $5 to the donate, that would be great. Um, and I guess without further ado, we're all here to listen to Seth. So maybe if we could just give you the floor, Seth.
Thank you, Stuart. Am I coming through okay?
You are.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be with you. Thank you, all of you, for making time on, at least where I am, a beautiful Wednesday evening. Thank you, Delilah, for that welcome, and Stuart, thanks for the invitation. And I want to acknowledge that I'm joining from the with gratitude from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, otherwise known as East Vancouver and the riding of Nicky Sharma. So that's where I'm joining you from. And it's great to be. I recognize a number of friends in the audience, which is lovely to see. And It's good to be back with SCOEE. I'm realizing I spoke to this group probably shortly after my book came out about 4 years ago. Um, and that was fun. It's been a busy 4 years since then. A little while after my book came out, David Suzuki and Tara Cullis gave me a home with the David Suzuki Institute to create this thing called the Climate Emergency Unit. So that's where I do my work these days. We're a national team of 7 folks from across the country. And but the work of the Climate Emergency Unit is about initiating joint coalitions and campaigns around the climate emergency ideas in the book. I have spent the last number of years kind of deep in the study of emergencies. Some of you will know from my book, It's all structured around lessons from the Second World War, another emergency. Of course, it came out during the pandemic, which was another emergency. I spend my time deep in the climate emergency, and now, of course, we've got yet another emergency south of the border. Um, I guess the other thing I should mention that's changed in my life since the last time I was with SCOEE is that in addition to my work life, I'm now a minister's husband, as some of you will know. My wife is among those elected in October and is now the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Christine Boyle. But in saying that, look, I just want to say I really am trying my best these days not to cause her any trouble. So please, um, all outrageous things that I am about to say are attributed solely to me. So there you go. We are having this discussion in a time of crisis. Um, and like many of you, I suspect, the thing that's got me worried when I look south of the border, I don't see this as simply a trade threat with all of its associated economic uncertainty. I think it's much deeper than that. I think what we are seeing unfolding to the south of us is really an outright fascistic regime. Um, and in BC and in Canada, we only narrowly avoided the same fate. Um, and my fear really is that if progressive governments, whether in BC or Canada or the UK or France, I feel like we're in a moment of that should rightly be seen as a reprieve. And if we keep trying to respond to the real crises that we face, whether it's housing, poison drugs, the concentration of wealth, inequality, healthcare, and of course, the climate emergency that I work on. If we keep responding to these crises with incremental policies, constrained by neoliberal assumptions, that we're never going to get ahead of the curve. That's my fear. Is that we will be stuck continually under delivering. And the far right project is going to capitalize on those failings. They're going to rage farm our failings and the fallout, and then we're going to end up going down the same path as we see occurring to the south of us. That's my fear. And I think a crisis moment like we find ourselves in requires some brash and imaginative thinking and policy responses, not timidity. Crises are no time for timidity in the response. So I want to talk a little bit with you before we open this up about what I see as, first of all, what not to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about taxes tonight, the need to increase revenues. One of the issues I spent a bunch of time campaigning on is this idea of a youth climate corps. But in particular, I want to talk tonight about what I see as the vital role for not just existing Crown enterprises. I mean, thank goodness we have the legacy of BC Hydro and ICBC and BC Housing, all these legacy NDP Crown enterprises. But we actually need a new generation of Crown enterprises to meet this moment. And I want to talk with you a little bit about that. But before delving into any specifics, I want to introduce you to the framework that I and my team at the Climate Emergency Unit employ. Ever since my book came out, the question that comes up most often is, how do you know when a government is actually in emergency mode? Like that it actually gets the emergency. And trying to answer that question forced me to distill my book and the work that I do now into what I call the 6 markers of emergency. I'm just going to throw them up on the screen right now. There they are. These were written with an eye mainly to the federal government, but also provincial governments. But really, they apply to the leadership of any large institution. It could be a post-secondary institution, a faith institution, a union. This is when you know the leadership is actually in emergency mode. Number 1, it spends what it takes to win. Number two, it creates new institutions, particularly new economic institutions, to get the job done. Number three, it shifts from voluntary and incentive-based policies to mandatory measures as needed. Number four, it tells the truth. It tells the truth about the severity, the reality of the threat and the crisis. Communicates a sense of urgency about it. Number five, it commits to leave no one behind. This is an important one for us as social democrats, is this idea that to truly mobilize the society requires social solidarity, and inequality is toxic to social solidarity. And to forge that social solidarity, you need to make a commitment that people's economic security and employment security is going to be centered in the program. And number six, you center Indigenous leadership rights and title. This is the lens through which I approach all of these questions, and how I tend to assess policies these days and how serious a policy response is. In the Second World War, which I study in the book, I would say that the government did the first five of these. In the first year of the pandemic, I would say our governments mostly hit all six of these, although there were some hits and misses in there. But I would say, with respect to the climate emergency, and with all respect to our government, neither the federal government nor any provincial government of any political stripe actually hits any of the six markers. But you're going to find I come back to this marker framework quite a bit. I want to start off, though, saying a little bit more about what not to do in an emergency, because one of the things, some of you will be familiar with my sister Naomi Klein's work, and she does this. 20 years ago, had this book, The Shock Doctrine, that came out. This idea that in moments of shock, you get these interests that take advantage of shocks to advance an otherwise unpopular agenda. The speed with which the fossil fuel industry has seized on the Trump threat to drive home that we need more pipelines and more LNG, it's both unsurprising and yet obscene. And I want to say something about that. For me, pipelines, this recurring pipeline fight we find ourselves in, it's like our national symbol of denialism. Like we're like addicts constantly bargaining. Please, just one more pipeline, and then we promise to go straight. Or if you're, if you're the federal Liberals, one more pipeline, and we promise to use the money to fund the transition. Let me be clear on something. Pipelines and LNG aren't about getting out from under the thumb of the U.S. or Donald Trump. They're the opposite. They actually put us closer into bed with the elephant. And because the money interest behind this industry and these projects, it's not just that they're mostly American. It's that they are some of the Donald Trump's closest allies. In fact, let me show you a picture. I want to show you a little quick picture from last week. There you are. Can you see that on your screen? The guy standing immediately to the left of Donald Trump is Steve Schwarzman, close ally, one of Donald Trump's major funders. He was in Saudi Arabia with Donald Trump last week. That's when this picture was taken. There he is, right next to the man himself. He is the principal source of money behind the PRGT and Silism's LNG project that's now before our government. Silism's LNG is described as a Nishka project. It will, if it happens, it would be hosted on a piece of land that the Nishka own fee simple outside of their treaty territory, but they don't have an equity stake. The equity in Silism's and PRGT is first and foremost this guy right here. Secondly, the CEO of Apollo, which is also super close to Donald Trump. KKR, the main investor in the Coastal GasLink pipeline that was just built to feed LNG Canada. These guys are some of Donald Trump's largest donors and closest allies. And the idea of making a deal with these people at this moment, makes about as much sense as making a brand new deal with Tesla or Starlink and Elon Musk. Um, the other thing about pipelines is that they take a long time to build. No matter how much a government wants to expedite the timeline, they're complex. They require assessments. There's going to be indigenous opposition. There's going to be extreme weather. I mean, one of the reasons why the TMX pipeline was slowed down and its cost went up is because of the atmospheric river in 2021 and the fires that slowed the whole project down. They take a long time, and by the time any new project is finally done, Trump ain't going to be the president. And with any luck, he will in fact already reside in the fiery pits of hell, and will no longer be with us. There is this irony, speaking of TMX, everyone says, oh, we need more pipeline access to Tidewater. TMX is complete. It costs the Canadian taxpayer $34 billion. And here's the irony. It's undersubscribed. It's not running at capacity. And a little over half of what's coming out of the TMX pipeline isn't going to Asia. It's going to California. It's not, in fact, diversifying our markets. So the case is clearly not there that we need these for diversification. But more than that, I think a moment like this, a crisis moment like this, it needs to be seen as an opening to choose another path. That's what Europe did, right? When Putin invaded Ukraine, they catapulted forward in getting off of gas. And I think progressive leaders need to seize on a moment like this to do just that, to catapult us into the new. But we do face a crisis. And a core message that I wanted to impart today is that moments like this require imagination and audacity. I think we all are loving the fact that, there's sort of across the political spectrum, all this great tough talk and newfound solidarity in response to Trump's attack on our economy and our sovereignty. And the impulse, the collective impulse that we've all seen to buy Canadian and buy BC and cancel trips to the US, that's fantastic. And I think we all find some inspiration in the collective elbows up zeitgeist of the moment. But I want to put to you that all of that said and done, the response so far feels incongruous with the actual threat that we face. And too often in a crisis moment, I feel like there's this panicky impulse on the part of many leaders, understandable at some level, because these moments are disorienting, but to grasp for these well-worn default options, budget austerity, tighten up, don't spend too much, because of all the economic uncertainties. So there's that austerity response. Tax cuts, because, hey, tax cuts are the answer to everything. Now, in fairness, that's mostly been coming from the federal parties. I want to acknowledge, I think the fact that the BC NDP government chose to rethink its planned tax cut was exactly right. That was the right response. Tax cuts in a crisis are the opposite of what we need. Austerity is the opposite of what we need. And too often we get this reflexive turn to expediting approvals of new fossil fuel projects, which is a response that sees us deepening one crisis as we wrestle with another. And to my mind, these responses are plagued by this failure of imagination and of vision. You don't want moments of crisis to see us doubling down on the stale solutions of the past, particularly those that worsen inequality and the climate crisis. But rather, as I said before, these emergencies should be viewed as a portal. That's what the great writer Arundhati Roy describes as these crises moments. A portal, a rare opportunity to leap into the new. And we should be seizing on moments like this to de-link our economy from the US and from fossil fuels that are harming the people and places that we love. And for progressive leaders, these crises are exceptional moments. They're in fact an invitation to rapidly transition our economy and our society in ways that we've known we needed to do for a long time. When I listen to Mark Carney federally or Premier Eby, I'm hearing language that sounds right. The need to be more economic autonomy. And we're hearing both levels of government talking about needing to expedite building. Mark Carney talks about building things that we've never imagined at a speed that we've never seen. And I love that language. I think that's exactly right. But here's what concerns me is that we remain too stuck trying to incentivize our way to victory. We're trapped in a model that is not only far too incremental, but almost entirely reliant on the private sector to do the actual building. And the private sector does have an important role to play in the transition before us. And this is a key thing I hope you take from my talk tonight. If we are really going to expedite the transition to a made in Canada or a made in BC economy at speed and at scale, particularly in the context of a lot of economic uncertainty for the private sector, if we're really going to get a true green industrial strategy, then we're going to have to do much of it ourselves through our public institutions and crown corporations with brash direct investments in public infrastructure, Indigenous economic sovereignty projects, renewable energy, an east-west electric power grid, high-speed rail, zero-emission vehicle manufacturing, zero-emission nonprofit housing to wean ourselves off the fossil fuel industry once and for all. A few weeks ago, there was this terrific piece in the Winnipeg Free Press that was written by Robert Chernomus, a University of Manitoba economist, and Fred Wilson, who is a name some of you might remember. He lives back in Ottawa now, but he lived out here a long time and was a rep with CEP before they became part of Unifor. And the piece that they wrote in the Winnipeg Free Press was that our leaders should embrace Trump's attack as Canada's new C.D. Howe moment. Now, for any of you who know my work, I have a special fascination with C.D. Howe. He was the minister in Mackenzie King's Second World War cabinet who oversaw this extraordinary wartime military production that some of you have heard me talk about. Think about this in the war, right? The dormant BC shipyards. And again, here we are, we struggle to build a single BC ferry anymore in our province. In the 6 years of the war, the BC shipyards built about 350 ships, big, mostly 10,000-ton merchant marine ships, from scratch, basically. The naval architects had to be imported from the UK and the US. All these thousands of people had to be recruited and trained up. The Vancouver Shipbuilders Union local went from a small local of 200 guys to the single largest local of men and women in the country. That's what it means to be in an emergency mode. Now, Howe, a little bit like Carney, actually, he came to government with this extensive background in the private sector and had amassed considerable private personal wealth. And he's a private sector guy. He was to the right of Mackenzie King's cabinet. But he was seized with the imperative to ramp up wartime production. And if the private sector couldn't quickly do what needed doing, he established a new Crown enterprise to get the job done. And in the course of the war, he established 28 new Crown corporations. Now, the BC NDP have a legacy of establishing new Crown enterprises from the 70s and the 90s, but not so much in recent years. I think we need to establish a new generation of public and Crown corporations, or they could be subsidiaries of existing Crown enterprise that can hasten our transition off fossil fuels and relocalize manufacturing. They could be federal or provincial or municipal or indigenous. But what if BC Hydro had a subsidiary that was mass producing and installing electric heat pumps and rooftop solar, and actually pair that? Here's an interesting little bit of information. Just a few weeks ago, in the UK, under a Labour government, They announced that as of a year and a half from now, every new building and home in the UK has to have rooftop solar. So that one policy creates a whole market for the production and installation of rooftop solar. What about new neighborhood energy utilities doing geothermal heating and cooling, or a new Crown corporation or a subsidiary of BC Housing to mass build zero emission non-market housing, right? So that we're not reliant on private developers to do all of that. What about a new public corporation to manufacture electric battery ships or buses or farm equipment, or to convert, there's thousands of ships up and down the BC coast, private ships that need to be urgently converted to electric marine battery. So right now we're building these floating platforms for LNG, Cedar LNG, and now they're hoping to do so for Silisms. These floating platforms that are basically going to be built in South Korea, and long term will employ 200 people. Come on, we could do better. What if we had a floating platform jointly owned by a Crown enterprise and the local First Nation that was retrofitting all of these ships up and down the coast to electric marine battery? And the thing is, these corporations can be money makers, right? People pay a fee, they pay a utility fee, even as they employ local people. So I think that these are the kinds of ideas that we need in this moment. And also I mentioned one of the things we primarily campaign on in the Climate Emergency Unit is the Youth Climate Corps. I think this is a moment that is tailor-made for a new joint federal provincial public program to quickly deploy significant resources and launch a youth climate corps. It is purpose-built for this moment, giving young people a chance to find shared purpose as they mobilize in our collective defense. Like, we desperately need an audacious new public program that would say to everyone under 35, would you like to enlist in a 2-year training and employment program that will set you up for a career confronting the crisis of our lives? A program that would place young people in jobs responding to extreme weather events like fires and floods and heat domes, building community and ecological resilience to climate-induced events, and most importantly, driving down carbon pollution with renewable energy projects and building retrofits of public transit. As we deal with the repercussions of the Trump economic attack, it's going to be young people who so often are the last hired, first fired, who are going to be facing rising unemployment. A youth climate corps that trains them up in the work that we desperately need to de-link from the US and from fossil fuels is exactly what this moment calls for. And the final point I'll make before we open this up to discussion is around taxes. There is something odd in this moment. You see, both federally and provincially, our leaders are talking about how we are entering an economic war with Trump. And they're right, we are. But normally, in a war, governments increase taxes. That's why it was World War I, we introduced the income tax. World War II, not only did we introduce new taxes, but we had an excess profits tax, what today we would call a windfall profits tax, that capped profits for all corporations until the crisis was over. This is how we're not going to be able to do this job if we're not raising new revenues, friends. But it's more than that. It's not just about raising revenues. It's about forging social solidarity. Think about this. Think about the first year of the pandemic. We all experienced this wild whiplash. I don't know if you remember, right? We went from low social solidarity to, within a few weeks, a peak of social solidarity that none of us, no matter how old on this call, have experienced in our lifetimes. And then we pissed it all away, all in the course of a year. It's tragic. Now, why did that happen? Because even though in those early days, when we were banging pots and pans at 7 o'clock to support healthcare workers, and our leaders said, we're all in this together. Except it turns out we weren't. Some people were making incredible sacrifices, including frontline workers in healthcare and food processing, and other people were making out like bandits. with incredible profiteering. See, that wasn't allowed in World War II. The Mackenzie King government, like the governments in the UK and the US, understood painfully a painful lesson from the First World War, where there had been grotesque profiteering that had undermined social solidarity. They couldn't let that happen again, so they capped corporate profits. And that was how they communicated to society as a whole. We're all in this together for real. Even though they were spending money like crazy on the war, they introduced the first income transfer programs. Family allowance comes in the war. Unemployment insurance comes in the war. That didn't happen in the pandemic. The years during and since the pandemic, we have seen grotesque profiteering again. If we are going to sustain the kind of social solidarity that we have seen in the early days in response to Trump, if we're again to not see it pissed away, we are going to need policy measures that communicate to the public that everyone, the rich as well as the poor, is sacrificing to transition us into the new. I'm going to stop there and open this up for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth. That was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. Um, Thank you so much. And maybe we could stop the recording, Levi.